a post on Twitter caught my eye. Yes, I will continue to call it Twitter. This opening can lead to so many different stories, most of which end badly. However, this particular post was a good thing that also held a lot of hard truth in it. It was from a few months ago and was posted by someone I follow by the name of Lakota Man. I have no recollection why I initially chose Lakota Man, but it has proven worthwhile for those interested in trying to have a good experience on Twitter before it literally disintegrates from its own absurd lack of value. Lakota Man posted that the Los Angeles Department of Power and Water was helping to bring electricity to the parts of the Navajo Nation for the first time. Responses to that post included relief that now those residents would only have to travel by truck to haul water to their homes, rather than gas for generators and water. I paused, and I thought about electricity and how very much of it I use every day, and how loud generators are, and how expensive gas is, and how after Hurricane Sandy, when I was farther to the coast, closer to the coast, farther from here, when we used a generator, all we had hooked up to it was the refrigerator and a single space heater. I thought about how my professional life is made easier by writing on a laptop, and how during COVID, I preached only over Zoom. I thought about how my kids have maintained friendships over the internet. I thought about Masterpiece Theater and the light I read by at bedtime. I thought about warm coffee and hot showers. And thinking of all those technological blessings, I was urged to a kind of gratitude. And being November, who can't use another gratitude prompt, right? But there's an edge here, isn't there? Like, I'm a little uncomfortable being grateful for all of this ease and warmth that I get to have, that so many have been struggling without for so long. In the 1920s, about half of all Americans had electricity at home. In 1933, the Tennessee Valley Authority began a huge program of bringing electricity to rural Tennessee. And in 1944, President Roosevelt authorized rural electrification nationwide. Nationwide. So why, 78 years later, are some residents of the Navajo Nation just now being connected to the electrical grid? The answer to that question is about 529 years old. Buckle up. In 1493, the year after Columbus's famed voyage, the legal landscape of Europe and all of her colonies changed forever. Pope Alexander VI issued a papal bull. There's some irony there. I'm just going to leave it alone. That's hard. A legal order that essentially gave Spain the right to the entire New World. The item of interest here is not only who got to claim the territory, but what the bull says about folks who might already be there. And yes, the Pope did in fact know that there were actually already people there. The Pope said that land that was not inhabited by Christians could be discovered and thereby claimed. it was incumbent upon the discoverer to be sure that barbarous nations be overthrown and brought to the faith itself. It is perhaps prudent to recognize that Spain was still reeling from protracted warfare with Spanish and African Muslims who they longed to eject from their Catholic country. How tempting a new territory with converts waiting to fulfill the call of religious imperialism must have been. The doctrine of discovery, which this papal bull came to be known as, dictated the policy of European governments and European colonial cultures toward original nations from 1493 onward. I remember in the textbooks I taught from in American history a chapter called The Discoverers. But those chapters merely presented men of courage and adventure daring to test the boundaries of the known world. The doctrine of discovery complicates that old American history plot. What it meant to be a discoverer, it's hard to say, by the way, discoverer, according to this papal bull, was that you had the right to pretty much everything, and you needed to go to war with non-Christians in the interest of overcoming and or converting them. And this is exactly what was done in those early pre-colonial and colonial days, and for centuries to follow. The doctrine of discovery was written into clear law by the US Supreme Court in 1823, a case called Johnson versus McIntosh. Chief Justice John Marshall declared that the principle of discovery gave European nations an absolute right to New World lands, that indigenous Americans had a right to occupy the land, but that right could be abolished. The removal of original nations from their homelands that had already been underway picked up speed for the following 60 years, establishing reservation lands, marching men, women, and children to them under threat of death, distributing tribal lands to others when the land proved valuable, and eventually creating policies to not just remove the people from their land, but to attempt to remove the culture from the people, to cut their ties to one another, just as they had cut the original nation's ties to the land. And this was all legal. Because if you believe that it is your right to claim something because of someone else's identity, the rational work has been done for you, and society will provide you all the justification that you need. Now, why, you might wonder, am I walking you through this legal history of property in the New World? It is, in addition to being brazenly vile and tragic, a specific example of how othering is institutionalized and maintained with little to no effort on the part of most folks. Westward expansion and the treatment of First Nations as tolerable tenants who could be moved whenever the land they occupied was deemed valuable by others was not the end of the institutional response to the problem of what to do about the folks who lived here when the land was discovered. You know this. You know about the Trail of Tears. You know about the massacres. You probably even know about the extermination of the buffalo that was specifically undertaken to demoralize the indigenous population. You've heard about the heartbreak of boarding schools, one of which operated under the motto, "Kill the Indian, save the child." Two of these institutions operated here in Illinois. The Homewood Boarding School at the site of Jubilee College in Peoria, and St. Mary's Training School for Boys in Des Plaines. While most of these institutions operated in the late 1800s, Some continued on for many years and have living survivors today who can attest to the brutal treatment received while there, all in the name of assimilation. Children were cut off from their access to their own spirituality, from access to their families, from access to their community. They were forced to pray the prayers of the denomination in charge of them. The Unitarians established the Montana Industrial School for the education of children from the Crow Nation. Despite this group being widely recognized as being, this is a quote, least civilized of all the tribes, sensual and immoral, as described in Science magazine in 1887. Science. The damage done by such schools is incalculable. Our history of domination and subjugation and cultural warfare does not end there, and the telling could take days. You've heard all of the statistics of the ways that these and so many other failed policies have impacted the still living community of First Nations here in this country that espouses freedom and clings to a depiction of the first Thanksgiving as one of cooperation and mutual trust. The improvements occurring on the land of the Navajo Nation now are a result of the infrastructure bill that passed in 2021 by a wing and a prayer. The rehearsal of this information, the continuous inequity, my tracing it to its papal roots, may feel like so many other moments that we have undertaken in our UU communities in an attempt to see the domination in our history so we can hope to do better. And it is shattering. It is shattering because we cannot imagine being part of such brutality, nor can we fathom a way to make things right. We may even tell ourselves that we didn't make this mess, that we shouldn't have to pay for things that people who lived centuries before us and whose ideals more obviously outpaced their actions did in fact do. We shake our heads in pity. We may even feel some guilt or discomfort. But really, the problem is too big. It is too old. And who are we, the people of UUCD, or even the UUs of Northern Illinois, if we work together, to think that we can do something about it? The problem is big, like really structurally and culturally big. It has tentacles and legal ramifications. It has children and grandchildren. It has new locations and new faces. It is too big to fathom, and it will break our hearts again and again and again. And I fear that the learning and the heartbreak becomes quite a pit stop for most of us, myself included. Those of us who live reasonably comfortable lives and who have perhaps not been part of a marginalized group find ourselves struggling to integrate the reality that others experience. And I would suggest that processing through that feeling is necessary if you find that your feelings or your lack of practice in moving through them leaves you a bit paralyzed, stuck, overwhelmed, or uncertain. Because the rest of the message boils down to this: I know that our principles and the most deeply held values of our faith and the sources on which it draws call us to actively construct a world where we do not thrive on domination, whether its form be blatant and obvious or subtler and structural, Our faith calls us to a place where we cannot actually rest in comfort while others suffer. And our faith calls us to a place where gratitude for our own abundance, land acknowledgements, prayers of thanksgiving, are wildly insufficient. And I feel that wave of overwhelm wash over me. It is too big. It is too old. I didn't create it, and I don't know how to undo this. What can I do? Who are we to attempt to unravel centuries of mistreatment? We are people. Men, women, non-binary, children, gay, straight, black, white, and brown, who are all called to build a land of people so bold enough to shake their very foundations for the establishment of peace and justice for all. So where do we begin? We begin where we are. We begin with our thinking. We begin with noticing the patterns of domination in our day-to-day lives. Noticing the times that who we are helps us to do what we want to do. We notice and we make choices that align with our values of justice. We begin by using our feet and our hands to contribute to the greater good, challenging the impact of our economic divide by helping to distribute food and supplies, education, childcare, and healthcare to all of our beloveds, not just with our checkbooks, but with our bodies, with the sweat of our labor. We begin by seeing the circles that we draw, that we inhabit, and incessantly and insistently drawing them wider with welcome and curiosity for all of our relations, each and every living being that is part of our interdependent web. For if we can only do that, see that web, how can we do anything but demand equity, justice, and systems that actively work not to preserve the status quo, but to serve those in deepest need? How can we solve this ancient problem born out of bigotry, greed, and religious intolerance? How, dear friends, can we not? Our old ways of relating to those we deem other is built on total domination. We can only build something new. And to do that, we will have to both learn and act in tandem. There is not time for us to wait until we are individually perfect to share our gifts. We can learn about really sharing power and the gifts of community in ways that we have never experienced. We can ditch the old story about Thanksgiving and instead show our gratitude for this one earth, for all life on it, and for the love we have to give and share through our actions every day. We can only build a new land in our hearts, in our minds, and with our hands and the sweat of our brow, a new land with new systems and new morals and new understandings of how to love without subjugation, without domination. We can step beyond guilt and gratitude and move into new construction, building a land different from the one that was discovered, or one that was promised in a text that many do not believe in. building a society that truly operates by consent. A land where the life of each and every one of our relations is and will always remain more important than any of our institutions. May it be so. Amen. In that